Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. How to name your podcast, the strategy behind successful show names, plus the mistakes to avoid. You're going to want to stay to the end of this one because I'm going to tell you about something that drives so many people absolutely crazy, and I want you to avoid that particular one. We've got lots of things to get through, including the fact that you have to have a strategy first approach to this, things that you're going to need to avoid, different approaches to naming your podcast, things you must absolutely consider, and some tips and tricks that you want to make sure that you have covered before you go out there and name it. We're also going to have a special download for you, but you're going to want to go through all of this first. And at the top, I really just want to say you congratulations, because if you are at the point where you are thinking about the name of your podcast, it's becoming real. When you have a name, it is something that is starting to be right. We've got the wheels in motion here, and the podcast is going to happen. So to kick things off, I just want to go through a couple of don'ts. Okay, these are things that you must avoid, I believe. Okay, do not move too far away from your business and the image you need to project. That's right. You can have a fun idea, and I've seen it, and I won't name the podcasts, but I've seen some podcasts that have attracted some attention because the name is good, but does it send the right message about the brand and about the audience you're trying to engage with? I'm not so sure. We'll come back to more of that a little bit later. Also, I don't want you to think that you are necessarily a celebrity. In fact, I would challenge you to the fact that you're here watching this podcast. You're not a celebrity. So don't just name the podcast after your name. It's great for a Hamish and Andy or a Conan. They're big celebrities. They've built their brands over a long period of time in other mediums before they've come to the podcast platform. You need to have a name that is going to resonate. So, how do we go about naming it? Well, I'm going to say that it needs to be a strategy first approach. So what will the show be about? Have you actually worked that out? It's a fundamental idea, but work out what the show is about, who you're trying to talk to. Now, we've done a separate episode that is all about audience identification and how to do that, but my recommendation to you is to absolutely think in a little bit more detail about that. Watch that episode and then come back to this one because it is critical in your strategy first approach. Now, you need to understand what the format is going to be. Are you going to have regular segments? What style of show will it be? Will it be formal? Will it be informal? Do you have any gimmicks as part of the show? All of this is going to set the agenda for how you want the show to be, the style, and that is going to impact the kind of name that you want. So what are you trying to achieve for your business with the show? Because that is such an important thing to answer. Now, sometimes the show might just be internal. The show might be for existing clients only, really. And I've got examples of those podcasts that we've done. It might also be that your podcast is about sales. It's about growing your brand. If that's the case, you really do need to think carefully about the name of the show. So, who is it for? As we mentioned, that is an important thing to think about because it needs to engage with them. It needs to be something that resonates with that audience, that will put a smile on their face, will make them want to listen, and will make them feel happy to listen and to talk about it. And we'll come to some of that a little bit later as well. Now, I also want you to think about how you're going to produce it. Have you nailed the mechanics so that you can make sure that you can deliver consistently and to the same level every time? Because all of those things impact the name of the podcast. It sets a bit of a level of expectation for people. So, all of those things in mind, let's say you've ticked all of those boxes. Now let's get into the actual name and the options that you've got before you. Okay, so one option is to use your existing business brand. Now that tends to work better if you either have an established brand with a lot of equity in it, or, as I mentioned before, you are only really going to an audience that is predefined and that you are not trying to expand beyond that, and therefore it makes sense to use that. Now, in this particular example that I might give you here now as a school, you could go out and you could use the name of the school or the major motto of the school, which is what we've done with a podcast for a school that we've done. But the great thing about that is they're not trying to attract new people. It's just going to the existing audience. That's who they're trying to reach. It makes sense to use something that already has brand equity in it. But if your particular brand is not extremely well known, then I would question whether the name of the podcast is just the name of your business. Okay, so we've established that we may not be going down that path, but one of the options is, as I just alluded to, is to use your tag, your motto, or your strapline, or your campaign or headline that you use very consistently in your material. That may be a subset. You may even have a sub-brand as well that you use. They are all valid options. I'll give you a good example. We have a podcast that we do for someone, and actually their tagline worked beautifully to add value and be what is the right idea for the show for them. It's called Get Enabled Digitally, and it's a great tagline for their business. It makes a lot of sense, and it also made perfect sense to have that as the name of the podcast. Now, if those things don't work for you, now you're starting to get into more creative spaces. So I want you to consider your values. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but it's so important that your values are aligned with the kind of name of the show. Make sure that it is going to add value to your existing brand. That includes adding value to the story of your brand. That's why I'm actually a big advocate for not using your brand name for it as well, because you've got an opportunity with your podcast to continue the story and add more value to your brand. So make sure it is very much aligned with your values. Now, that includes how you want to be seen. Okay, so make sure that you are pulling in the same direction as your audience and where you want to be as a business. Now, you have another option of how you might go about the name of the podcast, and one of that is to speak to the problems. Now, that tends to be a great way to go about things for the name of the episodes of podcasts, unless you have one particular problem that you are really solving for your clients, and there's maybe a million different ways to attack that one specific problem, then I would strongly suggest that probably the problem part is not really the name of the podcast. So where does that leave us? Well, there are a few questions that you need to answer that you can utilize in order to come up with the name of the podcast. So the first one is, who is it for? You can absolutely have a podcast name that is just around about talking to who your audience actually is. There's a great podcast, it's called Coaching for Leaders, for example. It's pretty obvious who that is for. It's for leaders, it's coaches talking to leaders. It's pretty simple. In fact, my podcast, one of my other podcasts, I should say, Biz Bites for Thought Leaders, fairly similar in that regard. It's pretty obvious that it is about bites of business information for thought leaders. That's who it is for. If you don't like that approach, and that's okay, that may be taken already. It might be that you're better off talking to what it's about. Okay, so here's an example of what it's about. There's a very great podcast. It's been around for a long time, and a shout out to Tim. Small Business, Big Marketing. Great podcast to have a listen to. Very obvious what it's about. It's about big marketing ideas for small business. You absolutely know from the name what it is about, and that's a driver towards it. I would argue as well, Podcast Done For You, the show, the one that you're listening to right now or watching, is exactly that as well. It's very much a name that is zeroed in on on who it is for, what it is all about. It's pretty obvious. I hope so, and I hope that's why you're here. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Just a little insight in there. All right, let's come back to it. What type of show and insights will you get? That is the other question that you need to ask in order to get a name. What type of show or insights will you get from listening? Perfect example of this one, Diary of a CEO. It's pretty obvious. We're going to get some insights into CEOs. And what a great podcast that one is. But again, don't necessarily, here's another little inside tip, don't necessarily compare what your podcast is trying to do with that one. Steve is a great man, has a fantastic lot of resources to it. I believe there's something up to about 40 people that work on that show. I'm guessing if you're watching this podcast episode, you don't have those kinds of resources, so don't necessarily compare your show to that. But doesn't mean you can't take inspiration from the name and the style of name that it is. What type of show insights will you get? Maybe that's a way of getting some creative ideas for you. Now, there are other things that you need to think about when you are designing the name for your show. Make sure there's some emotional appeal to it. All of those names that I've mentioned all have a bit of an emotional appeal. They talk to the heart of what it's about. The other thing is you might want to do something that is more attention seeking, and we've talked about that already. Make sure it's still aligned with your values, but you can do things that maybe is in keeping with that will enable you to grow your brand a little bit further, whether that's having fun, whether it's being more serious, whatever it is, it needs to make sure that it ticks the box of emotional pull and is engaging with your audience as well as the attention seeking. Now, here's some other things to think about as well when you're designing the name of your podcast. You usually don't need the name podcast in it, okay? It's kind of assumed. You can always add it on to the end when you're talking about it, saying, hey, check out my podcast, XYZ, or did you know that I have the blank, blank, blank podcast? Okay, so you don't need the word podcast to actually be in the proper name, which means you don't actually need it to be in the graphic. It's one of the things that you do need to think about all this, and we're going to have a separate episode where we'll talk all about the graphics. But one thing to think about when you're designing the name is you don't want it to be too long. Graphic space is relatively small. Remember, most people are going to listen to a podcast on their phone. You've all looked at Spotify, Apple, or Amazon, or one of those, and you've seen that you have a reasonably small thumbnail which has the name of the podcast in it. If you have a name that is too long, the font gets too small, people can't read it, make it punchy and to the point. Okay, so that's one of the big tips, is definitely making it to the point. Now, some other important things to check along the way, as well as keeping it short, it needs to be memorable, right? It needs to be associated with your brand, and it can be a catchphrase, by the way, and we did sort of gloss over that a little bit earlier on, but I do have a couple of clients that have podcasts that are very much in that catchphrase area. It's a phrase that they use all the time in their business. Made perfect sense to also utilize that as the name of the podcast. Helps keep it memorable because it's a phrase that they use already all the time. Okay, so as I said before, small space, don't make it too large. Now, think about the visual appeal. Again, we're going to get into this in more detail in another episode, but I'm telling you, bring in a graphic designer. Don't come up with a great name and then just fall over by trying to do it yourself. The other thing too is get some professional photographs taken. You know, it is a small fee to pay, but you can use professional photographs in so many different ways. It's great to do them. Make sure you get some headshots. Make sure you get some shots that are full body, different angles, doing different things. And if you've got someone you know that can take all those fantastic photos and make them look professional, absolutely do that. But it makes a world of difference if you can do that and make them current. I hate it when I see photographs of people that were taken 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that's not who they are anymore. Keep them current, keep them updated, and that's a big little tip to do for you that I think can make all of the difference. If you look at lots of the great podcasts out there, they all have great photographs included in the graphics. So that's something to think about. Now let's get back to the name. All right, so to wrap all of this up, one of the things that you have to remember is you've got to make sure that you love it, okay? Don't just fall into a name and just go, oh, well, that'll do. No, you have to love it because you have to be able to talk about it. You have to put a smile on people's faces when you do. You have to be proud. You have to be willing to share it. And you equally have to make sure that your audience will not have any obstacles in the way of sharing it or admitting they're listening. You don't want it to be something that they think should be a secret, right? You want it to be something they're proud to talk about and to go out and say, hey, you should check out this podcast. It's why it's one of the great things for business, because it's much easier to go to someone and say, hey, you should check out this podcast. You're not actually doing a complete business referral. Hey, let me introduce you to Steve, and Steve's going to talk to you about this. You're doing that kind of sales approach and things is reasonably difficult to do, doesn't come comfortably and naturally to most people. Whereas if you say to your clients and your supporters, hey, I'd love it if you share the show, they're not telling anyone to do anything other than perhaps check out a listen, and then it's up to you to engage with it in the show. So you want the name to make sure it's something that people are going to be happy to embrace. Now, yes, you can always review the name and modify it in the future. Show names can be changed. I made some modifications to mine. My other show, Biz Bites for Thought Leaders, was originally just called Biz Bites. And I discovered along the way, I don't know how I missed this early on in the piece, is that there was another podcast with a similar name. There was a slightly different spelling with bites, because that one was more about computers and technology, whereas mine about thought leaders. So I added the for thought leaders to it, so it became Biz Bites for Thought Leaders. So it was modified, easy enough to do, and one of those things that you can grow as your business grows along the way. Now, here is the bit that I alluded to at the beginning that I want you to make sure that you do not do. When you think you have a name, and you even have a short list of 3 names, please, please, please do not go and seek the opinion of family and friends. Love them as you might do, trust some of them as you might do, unless they are your audience, they're not necessarily going to be the best people to ask. Ask your audience, ask some clients. Absolutely, they're the right people to ask. If you said, hey, we're about to start a podcast, we're going to name it A, B, or C. Do you have a favorite? Tell me why. Get some feedback if you like. I don't think you necessarily need the feedback, because I think you know your audience and I think you understand what's going to work for your brand. But if you want to go down that path, do that. And if you have team, you can absolutely ask your team, but you need to preface it with the idea of saying, this is for our clients. If you have a persona, and check out that other episode that's all about audience to understand a bit more about that, then you will know what your audience really loves and what will resonate with them. Okay, so that's almost it for this episode on how to name your podcast and the strategy behind successful show names, plus a lot of those mistakes that you need to avoid. I just want to say that you can download the guide for this and other episodes in the link in the show note. We're going to make it very easy for you to follow along and tick a few boxes and understand what are some of the pitfalls and names that have worked and ones that don't. Remember, it's great to look at and be inspired by some of the big podcast names that are out there, particularly the business ones, but that has taken them a long time to build those brands. There's very few that just jump out of the gate and immediately stand tall. So learn from what they've done, but also understand that you're not there yet. So when some of them have named it after themselves, remember, you're not the celebrity. And remember as well that it has to resonate with your audience and extend your brand. This is a real opportunity to extend the story of your brand. Okay, so before we wrap things up, and again, check out the show notes for links to the guide. If you enjoyed the show, remember, like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And remember, it's no use having a great name without a solid plan for your show and how you will make it happen regularly, with you positioned as the expert. Something to think about. Okay, this show's been produced by my team at podcastdoneforyou.com.au. Details of that and everything else are in the show notes. We welcome your feedback on other topics you want us to cover in the future. I'd love to hear some of the great names that you think are of podcasts that maybe we don't know about and we should. leave those in the comments or just send me a message and let me know. All right, until next time, this has been the Podcast Done For You show. We look forward to your company next time. Hit subscribe.